So, good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone, wherever we're coming from. Welcome back to another opportunity to rethink, reshape, and reimagine. And he's back. He's back with us, our favorite academic neuropsychopharmacologist. But before we proceed with the fireside chat, a few reminders. We would like to reiterate that this summit is our shared space as we constructively come together and learn from with each other. Let's inspire each other and discover together. We enjoin each one to give premium on respect, inclusion, and integrity. We will stand firm in ensuring that the summit remains to be a place where we can all have positive experiences. Also, it's a fireside chat with Dr. Carl, so there will be no Q&A here, but we will just be doing the flow of discussing as if we were, two friends talking. Maybe if you please continue with the questions on the chat, we can gather them at some point, and hopefully we can discuss them at the end of the day during our chill sessions. So, just to borrow something from the book that we're going to talk about, it's 5 continents, innumerable cities, and it's really one hell of a journey. It took him nearly 3 decades to arrive at where he is, with all these insights, perspectives, informed by a range of evidence, experience, and he's not done yet, and he will continue to learn and share, and he has a new book out. Our favorite, again, academic, I love saying this, Carl, sorry. Our favorite academic neuropsychopharmacologist, who is also a writer, a friend, a colleague, a speaker, a son, a brother, father, partner, and a former DJ and an avid music lover. We'll discover that a little bit. Welcome back to talk about his book, Drug Use for Grown-Ups, Chasing Liberty in the Land of Fear. Let's welcome back Dr. Carl Hart. Carl, hello.
Thank you, Joe. It's really great to see you again, as always. Looking forward to this conversation, man.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you very much. And I'm a bit fangirling here, Carl. I'll tell you why. When I read High Price, I thought, oh, I love that the tone was you telling me, as a reader, you telling us the story of how you got where you are now. You know, thinking about how come where I come from, Miami, how come there are different life results with your brothers. And when I read Drug Use for Grown-Ups, I thought you were still telling us a story, but we were conversing in the book. You know, it was like you were asking me questions and you were listening to my answers. And it was like I was challenging your perspective and evidence, and you will give a context in terms of the evidence and experience. And while brilliantly introducing us to new music icons and new music to hear, like Gil Scott-Heron, which I'm discovering to be such a great singer. So let's follow that lead, Carl, and I will follow my other hero in music, Julie Andrews, if I may. Let's start from the very beginning and just ask, against my better judgment as a facilitator, I'll ask 2 questions, but I think this will segue into what we want to talk about first, about the book. Talk to us about your thought process about coming up with the title. Drug Use for Grown-Ups. Who are the grown-ups we're talking about? And the subtitle has a lot to unpack, right? Chasing Liberty in the Land of Fear. So walk us through your thought process and how you were developing this book.
Yeah, so the title, my editor came up with the title. He liked that title based on what the conversation that he and I had, and so it was okay. It's catchy. People they know what that is. I don't know if I would have come up with that title, but I came up with the subtitle, and the subtitle means more to me because it's chasing liberty. Liberty being that you live like you're free. You live your life like you want. Of course, you can't prevent others from doing the same. So you have to be a member in a society, and that's fine. And so chasing liberty, and when I think about using drugs, that's what many people are just trying to do, trying to have their moment, trying to take control of their consciousness. And but in this book, when it comes to drug use, it's oftentimes you're chasing liberty in spaces of fear, in land of fear, because of all of this misinformation that's out here about drugs. And so that's what it was really about. Although we're always, these countries say that their citizens are free and they have liberty, except if you engage in this behavior or that behavior. Of course, these behaviors are behaviors that you're not bothering anyone. It's like, so you should be permitted liberty, but we don't always feel that way because we sometimes are judgmental and all the rest of those negative things that go along with that.
Yeah. So again, unpacking what grown-ups mean. These are responsible adults, right? These are people who are committed to their responsibilities, whether that's to their family, to education, to their work, to their other intimate relationships. So was that the goal for you, to really present? Because in a way, I appreciate that you presented us with a way to reframe the narrative, the discussion. You always say, let's take the drugs out of the equation. Now, at the forefront is we're talking about grown-ups and we're talking about the main goal. And you offered something that was fascinating as a phrase. You said it's really about health and happiness, the pursuit of happiness, and how we are always stopped in pursuing it. Can you talk to us a little bit more about that? Yeah.
Yeah, you nicely put it. When we're having this conversation, we're talking about grown-ups. We're talking about adults. We're talking about people who take control of their life. We're not talking about children, because when we bring in children into this discussion, it's oftentimes we bring in children to shut down the conversation, not to facilitate the conversation. So when we're thinking about adults, I thought about how do we maximize your happiness, your health here on earth. I mean, life is filled with pain, disappointment, heartache, heartbreak, all of those sorts of things. And we are just trying to do our best as people, as adults, as grown-ups. And so how do you do it? Some, of course, we're talking about grown-ups who exercise, they eat well, they sleep well, they do all of these things. They go support the arts, and they may also use drugs. All of these are grown-up activities. And so how can we help people to achieve this sort of health and happiness in ways that don't hurt themselves or hurt anyone else, but you just think about it just like any other activity. How do we help people? How do we help people to, I don't know, engage in sexual intercourse without hurting themselves? We think about making sure that they know their partner, they understand something about consent, they have protection, all of these sort of things. We help people to do this in a dispassionate way, particularly when these adults. How do you help people to drive an automobile in this sort of way? Why can't we have a conversation about drugs in the same way? And that's what I tried to do with the book. How can I help people to have a grown-up conversation about drugs, removing all of the stigma, removing all of the moralizing, removing all of the misinformation, but just thinking about it from an objective, best evidence sort of approach.
And constitutionally legal. It's enshrined in your constitution, right? I think that was one of the most clever things I picked up from how you reframe the discussion. You say that, of course, 70 to 80% non-problematic. Of course, a lot of more people don't use drugs. You found a way to, even before you introduce the content, to connect people. Almost everyone, if not all, can connect to that pursuit of health and happiness. Almost everyone can connect about love and caring, and then we reintroduce the content. We connected first before the content. So thank you very much for doing that, Carl.
Yeah, it's actually our Declaration of Independence. It's the founding document of the country. It's the very first document. And in that document, it's really important because enshrined in that document are some lofty, noble ideals. And so one of the first promises is that we are guaranteed life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And then it also says in that document that government should be created to secure these rights, not restrict them, secure them. And that's what we are striving toward in a society. It's not the law, but it's the ultimate ideal of American society. And so in your pursuit of happiness, it's up to you. We don't guarantee you happiness. We only guarantee you the pursuit of happiness and liberty and those sorts of things. And so however you decide you want to pursue your happiness, that's on you. So long as you don't prevent other people's from enjoying their rights. And that's, for me, that's a profound promise of any nation to its citizens. And I was trying to remind our nation that we promise our citizens these three rights, and we're not living up. We're not living up to that promise when it comes to citizens taking drugs or altering their consciousness as they see fit. And so that's inconsistent. That is our practice does not match the promise.
And we can hold them accountable by reframing it as, where are the promises? Where you're not living up to these promises. If I may just say this, Carl, because I think a lot of our audience now, they're listening to us talking about how to reframe, how to rethink, and what are the tips in terms of introducing the ideas about drugs, drug use, etc., by not exactly tackling the content first, but getting a hook, getting a connection. Of course, we did our assignment. The Philippine Constitution also guarantees this. It says, to build a just and humane society, it shall embody our ideals and aspirations and promote the common good, the blessings of independence, etc. It ends with, because there's freedom, love, equality, and peace. Plus our Article 14, Section 10, 11, 12, for everyone else who want to get this as a way to make a connection in workshops, etc. It tells us we should take advantage of the benefits of science for national development and progress. So there are many spaces where we can hook this health and happiness, pursuit of happiness concept without having to go to content immediately. So thank you for that, Carl. Now, did you want to?
No, just thank you for really picking up on that and delving into it. So I really appreciate it. And I appreciate your remarks about when you were reading it, like having a conversation with me. That's my favorite thing about reading, people with whom I can have a conversation. And so thank you. That means a lot.
You're welcome. Thank you very much. And thank you as well for presenting to us another way to frame it. So for everyone listening, something to think about for the chill session tonight. Aside from saying taking the drugs out of the equation, aside from taking health and happiness, when we explore drug use and other issues, what do we need to rethink? What are the other angles and entry points and common stories and angles that we can use, especially in our own context in the Philippines?
I think the first thing.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
I'm sorry. I thought that was a question.
No worries. Yes, please. Let's enumerate those stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. So one of the first things that I hope people take away, like from the book, is this overwhelming love for humanity. And so when we think about how we are approaching how we handle drugs or anything in a society, we want to make sure that we are motivated by our love for the people. That is, we want to recognize everyone's humanity first. If we recognize people's humanity first, then we are less likely to abuse people. Of course, we understand that if we are in a society, we too cannot abuse anyone and we can't harm other people. And if people are not harming other people and they are doing some activity, why should I harm them? Whether I'm government or just a citizen, that's very wrong. And if we are harming people in our society, then we need to look at ourselves. And that's one of the things I was trying to help people to understand, that many folks who use drugs around the world that I have seen, you have this theme of love and caring and consideration for your fellow humans. And that's what I hope people take away from the book too.
Oh, thank you very much, Carl. I think that really just captures how we can approach this as an issue: love and humanity as central themes. Um, are you ready for a Filipino clap, Carl? I'm just because I'm just trying to see, because many of the people who also do workshops and fireside chats, if you will, and these kinds, especially virtually, want some kind of action. So for this segment of our fireside chat, I'll just tell people, we don't see you, but we'll do this together. The clap we're going to suggest now is 5 claps. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then raise the hand and say rethink. So can we do that together, Carl? So 5 claps and everything. Ready, go.
Absolutely.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Rethink.
Rethink.
Sorry, Carl. You're a bit of a hyper person today.
Joe, man, it's your show. I'm with you.
It's our show. Anyway, yes. I think this now beautifully segues into, help us understand, because one of the things, my next book that I will read that you wrote has to be drug use, society, and human behavior. Because I think that also encapsulates the nuances of choice. How do people make choices? That's one angle. The other angle is, even when presented with evidence, human beings seem to have this, and you wrote this in your book, this moral default. Like they don't believe the evidence. Whether you say, this has been proven, painstaking research has been done, there is so much resistance to evidence. I wonder if you can talk to us a little bit more about why this happens, so we can understand and see how we can approach this in a way that will invite people to listen, invite people to converse, rather than be defensive and resist evidence.
Well, sometimes evidence, it's kind of complicated for some people, and that's okay. And sometimes it just seems so counterintuitive, and it's hard for people to wrap their heads around initially, and they may need to have it presented to them in different ways multiple times. So it's difficult. Although, I spend my life in dealing with the evidence, struggling with the evidence, and trying to let evidence dictate the way I live my life. But, so I think sometimes that's a big ask of people. And that's why I'm trying to keep it simple. When we are talking about this issue of drugs, the question for me is, if are we being judgmental about other people's activity? Are we being judgmental about their drug using behavior? That meaning that in terms of adults, I don't have the right to tell another adult how to live their life. I don't have that right. Especially if that adult is not bothering anyone or not violating anyone else's right. And that's simple. That's it. That's all we're asking of other citizens. Okay. Even if you're struggling with the evidence, if another adult chooses to do something where they're not bothering anyone, it's not your business. And so you can struggle with the evidence. That's fine. We can work on that. I'm happy to help. But in the meantime, you can't bother these other people about some activity in which they're engaged. And so that's all we are asking people. We're trying to keep it very simple. When we keep it that simple, we understand that our job is to be good members in a society. Our job is to try to help support the society, help support others where we can, and not be disruptive, of course. And sometimes we all are, because this is a work in progress. And when we are, we just try our best to correct our behavior such that we are not negatively impacting other people. And that's part of it. It's part of learning. It's part of the fun of living. But what we can't be is judgmental.
Okay. So keep that in mind. What kind of issues does evidence bring up for me as a person, the one receiving it? We need to be more self-aware, because you did mention in your book about we need to recognize that there's a wide array of beneficial outcomes specific drugs offer, not just in the alleviation of pain. How come? And this is where I don't get it for a lot of people. I know where they're coming from, but how come, aside from pain, when people use drugs for pleasure, then we stop thinking, then the judgment comes out?
Yes.
Yeah. So
Yeah, that's a difficult one. I think in our cultures, we tend to think. I mean, I think this might have a lot to do with religion and where you suffer, and that shows how deserving you are. The suffering, and that's a kind of twisted perspective in that. Pleasure is a good thing. Happiness is a good thing. If you are happy and you're experiencing pleasure, you're less likely to treat others poorly. If you're happy, you're more likely to treat others better. And so we want members of our society to be happy. Happiness, pleasure, all those are good attributes. Those are things that we want more people to experience.
Okay, absolutely. And you also mentioned in your book, let's also include intimacy, bonding, friendship, kinship, brotherhood. All these things come into play when drugs, for whatever reason, the range of realities of how people use drugs come into play. Yeah. Thank you for that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. That's one of the things that we don't acknowledge much. For example, we think about something like alcohol. We understand it with alcohol.
Yeah.
You may have a glass of wine with your significant other, or and then you have a good evening, a good intimate evening, and you enjoy yourselves, and that's cool. But there are a number of people who do other substances other than alcohol, like something like MDMA. That does the job even better. It will increase the empathy, even cocaine for some people, or other drugs for other people. And where it helps people to connect with their loved ones, and it helps them to maybe be more generous, more magnanimous, more forgiving, more open. All of these qualities are things that we desire. These are all pro-social qualities.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you. And it all boils down to when people exercise their right or their agency to pursue these feelings, pursue these intentions, then it's not our right to interfere in that pursuit. Yep. Okay. I think one of the also poignant points in your book, Carl, is when you mentioned about when we take the drugs out of the equation, we tend to obfuscate everything else that need to be addressed. And you've always been very consistent. High price, you mentioned that. In your current book, you mentioned that. Poverty, unemployment. Walk us through. What are the other things we need to look at? Because again, we go back to how our governments deal with this. Mike Tan yesterday said, "Is this intentional?" When we are made to fear, when we are made to feel really scared, is this intentional so that we don't have to think critically about things? Because then they can blame and finger point and scapegoat through drugs.
Yeah, I talk about this in the book a lot. This is one of the things with this book. I was trying to really show the pleasures of drug use.
Okay.
But whenever you talk about drugs, you are always required to talk about some negative things and what happened, how did we get here. And when we think about how we got here with how we ban these drugs, how we restrict these drugs, and all of the sort of myths about these drugs, we got here in part because drugs are an excellent tool to generate fear in a population. So people are afraid of those people who use drugs, and we can other those other people. We can put them in a category, and in that category, we can dismiss them as not worthy of being here with us, not worthy of having their freedom. It just makes it so much easier because we can say, oh, this person uses shabu, so therefore that person is crazy, that person is psychotic, that person is not well. And so we can dismiss that person, although that's not true. That's just a myth for the most part. And so the vast majority of people who use shabu are not crazy. They don't have those problems that we say, but it's easier to dismiss them. And it's also easier to kind of galvanize support when you have a common enemy. And so like the war on drugs become that common enemy. When you have these governments saying we have a war on drugs. And so now you marshal all of your resources to fight this common enemy, drugs. But you're not really fighting drugs because drugs are just inert substances that need biological systems to exert an effect. So the common enemy becomes the people who use those drugs, the people who sell those drugs. They become the common enemy. And so when we talk about a war on drugs, it's really a war on the people. And that's what we have to understand, that we are harming our brothers and sisters. We are harming our fellow humans, our fellow citizens. That's who we're harming. And so I hope people understand that.
Yeah, especially I think when there is the election cycle. If it's an election year, this finger pointing, this blaming, this scapegoating becomes noisier and noisier and noisier. That this is all we hear. So a lot of people who don't have that access to non-judgmental conversations, only hear one thing or one side of the story. And you did say that in one of your chapters. The title was "The War on Us," another kind of reframing. Mention the war on drugs, but mention why it's really a war on people, and whether that's whether that's racial. Because I think for the Philippines, I think it's more about class. It's a war on poor people, in terms of the killing, of the arrests and incarceration. A big part of that is
it's a war on those who are conspicuously different in a way that we marginalize or we don't respect, or and so like you say, in the Philippines it's class, but there is something that is conspicuously different about those people who we are vilifying. When you go to a place like Northern Ireland, people are all white, and there is a war on people who are conspicuously different. They might be Catholic, but they are different. In the United States, it plays out in race, in terms of race, but it also plays out in terms of class too. People who poor white people in the middle of the country in places like Oklahoma, they are catching hell. When we think about even people who are chronic pain patients, they have been prescribed opioid medications to treat their ailment, and now they are the new victims of the war on drugs because we have decided that opioids are bad. Now all of those people who've been getting the medications to treat their illnesses, now they can no longer get it. So the war now negatively impacts them.
Oh, absolutely. And you gave us a 101 on how, at least for the U.S. government, they were very clever in telling Americans that the enemy, for instance, for marijuana, why call it marijuana versus cannabis? The enemy would be I want to be specific and precise. Latino, there was a word in
Yes.
your yes. Our disdain for those who are different than us, especially Latinos. The opium banning was about Asians, specifically Chinese people, and how they're different.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So I think it's something that we can also explore here in terms of reframing and then trying to reshape our thinking in terms of who are the people who we are marginalizing, who are the people who are deemed different and out of the outskirts of society. Okay.
That's right.
Yeah. Thank you for that. The other bit, because it's 10:42, Carl. You know what? I can talk to you forever.
It's
But
okay. I'm enjoying it.
thank you. Apparently, well, we have maybe about 10 minutes at least, because I also want to talk about responses. Many of the people who are listening to us now are thinking, okay, we've done some reframing, health and happiness, take the drugs out of the equation. We now know why we have some more understanding why people have this reaction or negative reaction to the evidence, and how we can use evidence to connect to people, whether that's based on biases and on the difference of people that we don't like or are marginalized in society. For most of us, we are excited to see what are the responses or programs that work, because you working on this for the last 3 decades, you've met people. In your book you say they allow them to be directed by evidence in coming up with responses. So they're not scared. They might be uncomfortable with the evidence. Your colleagues that you talk about in Switzerland, in other countries. Talk to us about, in your experience, what are the responses or programs that are effective? These things that really work in your experience.
Okay, so now we're shifting gears
Yes.
to people who are having problem with drugs. So we're talking about people who meet criteria for drug addiction.
Yeah.
So now this is a shift. So when we think about the people who are having problems with drug addiction, one of the programs or one of the models that I really like is the Swiss model, particularly treating something like heroin addiction. The Swiss, they have one option is that people can receive daily doses of heroin as part of their treatment. Now, that's only a part of the treatment. The treatment consists also of these individuals seeing a therapist, like a psychologist, a social worker, a psychiatrist. They have a medical internist, someone who deals with their medical issues. They also have folks to deal with their social issues, so social services.
Yep.
These folks have housing. Many of them work. They are employed. But they also, as I pointed out, they receive heroin twice a day, once in the morning and once in the evening. And these folks show up on time every day. They are consistent, responsible. Importantly, they are happy. And their health has improved certainly since they have joined treatment as a result of being in treatment. And so that's one approach. That approach is not moralistic. It just simply deals with the reality. There are a segment of our population that will be maintained on heroin, just like there's a segment in our population who are maintained on insulin when they have diabetes, just like another segment of our society who are maintained on antihypertensive medications to lower blood pressure. They think about it in the same way, in this non-judgmental, non-moralistic way.
And then you also make a case about drug safety testing. You say, for all the problems that we have, one of the biggest is ignorance. And it's readily solvable. That was your phrase in the book. And you make a point about people need to know what they're taking.
Yeah, this is a big concern, particularly in places like in the United States where we have a number of drug overdoses every year.
Mm.
And so one of the reasons that people are dying from drug overdoses is because they may get tainted drug. That is, they may think that they're getting
Yeah.
heroin when in fact they're receiving something like a fentanyl analog, which are far more potent than heroin. Potent just simply means that a smaller amount of the drug is required to produce an effect. And one effect that opioids can produce is respiratory depression. If you take too much of it, or if the opioid is more potent than you realize, you run the risk of overdosing. And so when people don't know that they have a potent opioid like a fentanyl, and they take it like it's heroin, they run the risk of overdosing. If we had drug checking, people
Mm.
would know what's in their substance, and as a result, they can adjust the amount of drug they take accordingly. But if they don't know, they can die, and that's what I
Yeah.
mean when I say people are dying from ignorance, ignorance about what is contained in their substance.
Absolutely. And you also make a very valid point about people are also ignorant. I was ignorant about how dangerous the withdrawal is from alcohol versus heroin. I didn't know that. And I was also
Yeah,
resisting that evidence. But I really had to calm myself and say, wait, what is Carl saying in this line?
Yeah, so let's just make sure that the listeners understand that the
Yes,
point
yes,
that I was making.
yeah.
One part in the book, one of the things I did in the book was to put myself through opioid withdrawal intentionally,
Mm,
mal withdrawal.
mm,
I wanted to experience it,
yeah.
so I would know what it was like. But I knew that opioid withdrawal was not potentially fatal for someone like
Mm,
me who was
yeah.
otherwise healthy. So I dramatized the fact that opioid withdrawal is safer than alcohol withdrawal.
Uh-huh.
That's a fact that I've known
Mm,
all of my career, because from alcohol withdrawal, one can die
mhm,
relatively easily if you experience alcohol withdrawal.
mm,
It's a lot more difficult to die from opioid withdrawal. And so that point, some people found difficult to believe, but it's the reality. One of the reasons that people find that difficult to believe is because we have so vilified opioids,
mm.
and we live with alcohol. I mean, we teach people about alcohol in our culture,
Yeah,
in our education, in our films, all of these sorts of things. So we know how to live with alcohol, and so
yeah,
people think that, well, that can't possibly be true because
yeah,
we have alcohol. But that's the point. We have learned to live with
yes,
alcohol, while we have not with some of the opioids. Instead, we have chosen to frighten the population as
yep,
opposed to educate the population.
absolutely. Going down to the default again. When we think it's bad, we stop doing critical thinking. We stop using evidence, and we don't believe it. I don't know if will congratulate you, Carl, about New York, because again, as a response, it's the whole gamut, the whole range of legalizing, decriminalizing, regulating, and you always make a point about, wait a minute, let's not congratulate New York for legalizing marijuana. There are some other factors involved here. Would you like to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. So recently, the state of New York legalized
Yeah,
marijuana. And sometimes people think that the whole marijuana legalization movement in the United States is
yeah,
driven by this issue of social justice or this issue of liberty and those sorts of things. It's not so much. It's driven by
mm,
economics.
yeah,
People see the tax revenues that are generated from legal marijuana, and that's one of the main reasons that we have this movement that's been successful in terms of liberalizing or legalizing cannabis in the United States.
yeah,
But it's okay. I'm happy with it because it means that less people will be arrested
mm, hmm,
for what they put in their bodies, and that's a good thing because we want to keep people out of jail and not in jail.
Got it. Thank you for that. Also, just to tell people that as we talked about responses, you did notice a shift in the discussion. That was intentional because a lot of people would think when we say the word response or program, it's only about problematic use, but there are other responses way bigger than that what you mentioned. I think we have a few more minutes, Carl. I'm not sure if you want to talk about this because in your epilogue, I thought one of the most powerful epilogues I've ever read. And you talked about how did I get here? Who am I now? What am I doing? It's time to be out of the closet. And I thought it also generated a lot of issues for me about, oh, that's very similar. We use that in sexuality and gender work. We use that with a lot of workshops about stigma and discrimination. You know, how some people are pushed to be hidden and remain hidden, and that has a lot of negative impact as well. But you made this conscious choice. I cannot stay in the closet anymore. You said, I have to be out of the closet. Could you walk us through about that process for you, please?
Yeah, as you pointed out, I've traveled around the world, five
Yes.
continents, many countries within,
Yeah.
and doing so to write this book. And also in the course of writing this book, I got high with a lot of people around the
Mm.
world to figure out what and how people do things. And one of the things that I noticed was that most of the people were middle to upper class people, and that's what you would
Mm.
expect. This is a multi-billion-dollar industry. That's the drug trade. It's a multi-billion-dollar industry, and it could not be supported by poor people.
Mhm,
It
mhm.
is supported by middle class and wealthy people. Otherwise, it wouldn't last.
Yeah.
And I found it strange that people who were captains of industry, people who were famous, academics, artists, a wide range of people who were using these substances, but the vast majority of them are in the closet. They're in the closet. Meanwhile, people on the margins of our society, the folks who've
Mhm,
been marginalized, who have been vilified, all of these people are catching hell for using
mm.
drugs.
Yeah.
And the folks who are middle to upper class people weren't coming to the aid of these people. They weren't saying, yo, I do the same thing, so why are you vilifying this person when I
Yeah.
do the same thing? And so I made a conscious decision to say, I'm standing with the people who have been silenced in the society.
Mhm.
I'm standing with the people who have been vilified. But that's in the spirit of my heroes. They always
Yeah.
stood up for the person who couldn't stand up for themselves. And so that was one of the things that I asked of the reader. People always say,
Yeah.
"What can I do to help? What can I
Yep.
do to change the situation?" You can get out of the closet.
Yep.
Because if middle to upper class people get out of the closet, it makes it a lot more difficult to simply write off drug users as people in need of help, who are psychologically damaged or disturbed, who are irresponsible.
Mhm.
Nothing can be further from the truth when we think about the vast majority of people who use drugs. The vast
Mhm.
majority of people who use drugs are middle to upper class people who are
Mhm.
responsible. They take care of their families, they pay their taxes, they contribute to their
Yeah.
communities, they are upstanding citizens. And that's what we have to do. We have to change that distorted image of a drug user and have a more representative image of a drug user.
Absolutely. Thank you, Carl, because it also challenged me as a reader and think if Carl did it, and for whomever who's not ready to come out, what's the version of coming out that we can do? For instance, I thought I can come out with my support for health and happiness, and the pursuit of happiness, and that nobody should be able to stop me from pursuing it if I'm not doing anything wrong. I should come out in terms of my support for programs that work and not stay silent. Whether I'm talking to a police person, to a community worker, or to my family, you know, because I think a lot of times when they say come out, people say, "Oh, but there are so many risks." Again, you make this as a point in your book. Everything in life has risks, and it's really about how we qualitatively balance the risks and benefits in our pursuit of happiness that will make a difference in our lives at the end. So for the audience, think about, what's my version of coming out? What do I have to be open about with? What do I have to be talking about? What if I have been silent about issues? What should I start conversing with other people about? So something to leave our audience with. Unless you have
Yes,
other words of encouragement, Carl, just to close out the fireside chat.
no, that's a great point. And just to piggyback off that just a
Yes,
little,
please.
is that the point is that if we're always thinking about our fellow humans and thinking
Mm,
about those people who are being tossed aside, those people who are being vilified, if we're thinking about those people, you can't be silent
yeah.
because that could very well be you one day. And so
Mm.
you want people to stand up for you when people unfairly, unjustly vilify you or stigmatize you. And so if we are all standing up on behalf of those people who've been thrown away, it's less likely that this will continue.
Oh, wow. You just gave me a clap, Carl. Do you realize that? So it's just to close this out. It's 5 snaps. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and just say and stand up, because you say coming out is a privilege to stand up for people. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then stand up. Reimagine. Ready,
Reimagine.
go. Yes, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Reimagine.
Reimagine.
Oh my goodness, Carl. I'm just in awe of you and how you use this privilege to really help people come into terms with drugs, society, and human behavior, and how all these come into play into how we make a difference in other people's lives. And just back to the video that opened this fireside chat, be the people we serve. It's a privilege to serve them. They're not just clients; they're our friends, our family, they're our peers. And we would like to stand with them, whether that's coming out with them, speaking with them, doing programs, conversing, talking, challenging, confronting. So on that note, I think, Carl, it was such an amazing chat. My first ever fireside chat, mind you.
Joel, it's always a
Thank you.
pleasure to talk to you, man. I really appreciate it. And it's so good to see you.
Thank you very much, Carl. Thank you very much, everyone. This has been such a great fireside chat with Dr. Carl, cool Carl, by the way. And see you for your next book. Take care.
Take
Thank
care,
you very
Joel.
much,
Take care.
everyone.